Hello, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for Wellesley at 150, Facing the Climate Crisis. My name's Courtney Coile. I'm the college's provost, the Lia Gelin Poorvu 56th Dean of the college, and the Stanford Calderwood Professor of Economics. As provost, I'm the college's chief academic officer, and it's my privilege to represent the entire Wellesley faculty. We're truly fortunate to have some of them speaking to us today. I'll introduce them shortly. But first, I wanted to place today's conversation within the context of Wellesley's radical founding ideals and its proud history of faculty excellence and impact. So a key premise for the college's founders, Pauline and Henry Durant, was that Wellesley students, unlike students at other women's colleges, would be taught by women faculty and led by women presidents. Our founders believed that women's intellects were equal to men's, and so they recruited, as its professors, brilliant women who'd been educated at pioneering co-ed institutions at the older Seven Sisters, and soon alumni of Wellesley itself. Our early faculty put Wellesley in the vanguard of innovation in research and teaching while devoting themselves completely to their students. Now, we've changed as an institution in some ways, but our stellar academic program and our faculty's commitment to our students has remained a constant. Their research and scholarship that the faculty conduct is truly critical to their fields. It gives our students access to graduate-level experiences, and it's really central to Wellesley's reputation as a liberal arts college that punches above its weight. Having never been a college to rest on our laurels, we decided that our 150th anniversary would be a moment to reflect on our education and on the preparation we provide. So we've produced a report that looks at alumni career pathways, and we found that a Wellesley liberal arts education leads to career success. Now we have the data to back that up. So here's just a few findings. Wellesley graduates who reached the executive level were just as likely to have majored in the humanities as in the social sciences or STEM. And 10% of our alums are serving in executive level positions. And my favorite finding, alumni most commonly cite research as a top skill in their professional profiles, followed by public speaking and leadership. And so the report really validated what we've always known, which is that a Wellesley education does not prepare you for a specific career, it really prepares you for any career, for the dynamic career paths that we know our alums will have. It provides flexible skills like critical thinking, creativity, and communication. I think as a faculty, we're really proud of teaching our students how to learn, because being a great learner is really the best preparation for a rapidly changing world, and we do live in a rapidly changing world. So if we follow the through line of excellence from Wellesley's founding to today, while the cultural context around Wellesley has certainly changed during the last 150 years, the college has remained important to the world as a source of education for brilliant women and as an intellectual center for ideas that matter and that lead to solutions that improve lives and advance knowledge. And so that brings us to our panel. When it comes to the urgent need for new ideas and creative solutions, the climate crisis ranks at the very top. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers today who will be helping us to explore this topic. So Becky Belisle, the NAFL Assistant Professor of Natural Sciences, is a materials scientist who focuses on developing next-generation solar cells that will be more efficient and affordable. Her lab synthesizes and investigates special materials and analyzes data to better understand emerging energy materials, including their fundamental stability and performance limits. She's conducted experiments at national laboratories, including the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory in California. Becky's committed to increasing interdisciplinary opportunities for students. This year, she's co-teaching a course that discusses the science, policy, and economics of renewable energy, as well as a principles and applications of mechanics course that emphasizes hands-on learning and real-world applications. Her lab supports a broad range of projects at the interface of physics and chemistry. Our second panelist will be Alden Griffith, Associate Professor of Environmental Studies, who is a plant ecologist with a major focus on the biological invasion of non-native species. His research examines how environmental factors and biological interactions affect the persistence and spread of plant populations, as well as how environmental factors like precipitation and soil moisture can impact plant population dynamics. Alden is committed to helping his students in environmental studies tackle the complexity of climate change using critical thinking and interdisciplinary tools. He teaches topics that include resource use, conservation, and environmental science fundamentals. His lab also serves as a center for environmental analysis on campus, processing soil nutrient samples for our beautiful botanic gardens. Rachel Stanley is our third panelist. Rachel is the Frost Associate Professor in Environmental Science and Associate Professor of Chemistry, and she is a specialist in environmental inorganic chemistry. Her research uses inorganic chemicals as tracers to quantify chemical, biological, and physical processes occurring primarily in the ocean, with a focus on the global carbon cycle and climate change. Rachel has conducted research with Wellesley students on how gases cross between the ocean and the atmosphere. For 2 summers, she used the largest wind wave tank in the United States, which is at the University of Miami, to simulate hurricane force winds in a well-instrumented saltwater pool. Her published research was recently integrated into a large-scale climate model to globally improve predictions of the ocean's role in climate change, specifically under high wind conditions. And we are very fortunate to have as our moderator a member of the Wellesley College Board of Trustees, Paulina Ponce de Leon Barrida, class of 2005. Paulina is a managing director and partner at the Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, and a leader in BCG's climate and sustainability practice. She works with Fortune 500 companies to define and implement sustainability strategies that drive business value and address regulatory, shareholder, and customer demands. She also leads BCG's impact partnerships with leading global non-governmental organizations, including the World Wildlife Fund and the Science-Based Target Initiative for Corporate Climate Action. At Wellesley, Paulina majored in physics and international relations. She did take some economics, so I'm going to claim her as one of our own. And she's since built a path that bridges science, policy, and business, a perfect example of the power of the liberal arts that I spoke about earlier. So now will you please help me welcome our speakers to the stage.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you to our panelists for being here with us today. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us in this important conversation. Maybe to get started, actually, I want to get a sense of who is in the room, because we're going to start with a couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up for you. But I want to get a sense of who's here. So are there any students today? Okay, we have a couple of students. What about alums? Great. Family members? Awesome. People in the sciences, humanities. Great. Who is maybe a little bit scared about climate change? Okay. What about hopeful about the progress that we're making? Okay, that's a job. That's a job. Okay, great. Let's get started. I want to anchor the discussion in the work that you're doing, the research that you do. So can we get started with that? And I think, Becky, you're getting us started. Oh, Alden, you're getting us started today. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and I'm really excited to be part of this panel. So I'm a plant ecologist, and ecologists obviously have a lot of concerns in thinking about climate change, and broader than that, environmental change. There's lots of other ways in which we're seeing rapid changes in the environment. And ecologists tend to think about how they study their systems in sort of organizational scales. So some people study the response of individual plants, say to warming or to elevated carbon dioxide. Some people study community ecology, which is thinking more about patterns of biodiversity and species interactions. I center most of my work at the population level. So that's really thinking about how individual plants and effects on individual plants collectively scale to whether populations grow or decline and persist, and how they can potentially move around the landscape. So I work a lot with invasive species and species that can be of concern for impacts on biodiversity. And in particular, recently, my students and I, we've been working on a plant called garlic mustard, which can be pretty dominant and invasive in forest understory systems. And so we're really interested in the question of the environmental drivers of populations and really trying to sort of a little schematic up there of all of the sort of factors that go into these influences and ultimately scale up to these population dynamics that we see about spread and persistence and sort of rarity or dominance, et cetera. And over the last several years, my students and I have collected data on the growth, survival, reproduction on thousands of individual plants across southern New England. And we're also collecting information on things like soil moisture and precipitation and trying to really get a handle on how did these populations respond to changes, say, in precipitation. We incorporate these data into population models known as integral projection models that really allow us to sort of ask these questions and say, like, what if we do change precipitation now that we have a sense of how this whole system responds? And what we're generally seeing is actually in the presence of competing plants, other competitors. Garlic mustard actually doesn't seem to do as well with increased precipitation, which is sort of projected for New England. But in areas where it's already dominant or there aren't many other competing plants, it actually seems to do just fine. So we're seeing lots of complexity in the response of this species. And also working with colleagues to look at different species and try to understand sort of how they may respond in terms of their population growth and ranges as we anticipate changes to temperature and precipitation. Also, much more recently in this project, we've been working in the fabulous new greenhouse facilities that we have on campus, which allow us to really nicely control conditions and address questions that are hard to really nail down in the field where there's so many variables. And so we've been looking at populations that are, or plants that are from populations all across New England and trying to get a sense of, in the greenhouse where we can control everything, how do they respond to soil moisture? And do they respond differently based on sort of where they're from and their populations? And so far we've been finding that while there definitely are differences, genetic differences in populations across New England, which itself is rather interesting, they tend to have the same response to soil moisture, which really helps strengthen the results of our field data so that we sort of see this consistent response. And it's just been really fun to be able to get students both in the lab, processing nutrient samples, processing photographs that we take to look at light availability, and analyzing like thousands of data points of soil moisture that we've collected, et cetera, and really trying to integrate this into a really sort of what ultimately is a very complex system, but try to get some generality out of it. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Rachel.
Thanks, Alden. Thanks, Paulina. Hi, so my research focuses on the role of the ocean in climate change. And the ocean takes up about 1/4 of the carbon dioxide emitted by people. And so that's really important. Essentially, it means if the ocean stopped doing this, climate change and global warming effects would be much worse. But it's also a really interesting question, because as scientists, this number has already changed in my lifetime, and it's likely to change in the future, and we don't exactly know how. So the questions that excite me for research and get me up each morning is really, how is the ocean taking up the CO2? How does the gas cross between the atmosphere and the ocean? And once it's in the ocean, what happens to it? So I do this in many different environments. A lot of my work, I actually go to sea. So there's a picture of an ocean and some students on a boat in the ocean. We go out several times a year to coastal Massachusetts, Rhode Island, looking at changes of CO2 in the water. And then I also have another whole set of students who are doing excellent work in the lab trying to develop new methods so we can measure different gases better than anybody else to make new measurements. Today I'm going to tell you about one specific problem related to climate change. Courtney touched on it in her introduction, which is work where we were trying to understand how does CO2 cross between the atmosphere and the ocean at very high wind speeds, essentially hurricane conditions. Now, I just said I went to the ocean, but as you can imagine, going to the ocean in a hurricane is like not a fun proposition. Besides getting seasick, it would not be safe, and safety is always first. So instead, we went somewhere nice and dry and hot on land. We went to the University of Miami, where they have the nation's largest wind wave tank. So this tank is huge. It's about the size of a building. There's pictures of it here. And here in this video, you can see what it looks like when we have, in this case, it was 100-mile-an-hour winds in the tank. Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's super loud. We turned off the volume. It was also really fun because as an oceanographer, I'm used to getting whatever weather, the world throws at you. But here, I felt very powerful. I could say like, whoosh, all of a sudden, there the winds are super high, and just as easily, like, stop, and they stopped. It was a great feeling of power. So what we were trying to understand was two questions. One is, how do gases cross between the atmosphere and the ocean at such high winds? And really, how can we parameterize it? How can we take this physical process and convert it into just mathematical equations that then could be used by many other researchers? And then secondly, we were really curious about the role of bubbles. So bubbles, you can see them in this picture behind it, were abundant in our wind wave tank. If any of you have ever seen an ocean on a windy day, you see white caps, and those white caps are just bubbles. And bubbles are essentially a direct way that gases can go between the atmosphere and the ocean. And scientists have known this for a while, but they haven't really known how to take it into account when doing models. So for 2 summers, we went to Miami for 2 weeks each. On your left is a picture of me with my students inside that very tank you saw before. We're dry here, so it was before we filled the tank with water. And we're setting up a bubble imager. And then on the top of the tank, we set up 2 mass spectrometers that we brought from Wellesley. Our collaborators, Brian House at the University of Miami, heavily instrumented the tank with many other physical and chemical measurements. We did experiments where we changed the wind speed from the wind of a bout of a windy day all the way up to Category 3 hurricane force winds. So what did we find? I have 2 graphs for you. So basically, the take-home message is we found that bubbles are really important, and we found a way that we can calculate them and add them to our models. On the left, you can see the data of different of our gases, helium, neon, argon, krypton, and xenon, is a function of wind speed, and that ranges in miles per hour from about 40 to 100 miles per hour. And what we found that was really unusual and important is usually, you can see in the beginning, as the wind speed increases, the gas increases too. And that's what people expect. But then it flattened off. And that's really important because currently in models, people sort of assume that it would go up and up and up. And you can see there gets to be a really big difference at the high wind speeds. As climate changes, hurricanes are much more intense. You've probably heard that in the news. And so this work looking at what's happening at high wind speeds is important. More recently, we've been working with collaborators at Princeton University to put all of this data that we collected into these large models. So all around the world, you might have heard of the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, does reports and models to try to understand what's happening to CO2 and to the world. And so before our work, the sort of best gas exchange that was used is in this panel here. So what's plotted is the oxygen concentration as a function of water temperature. Green is the data, so it's real data oceanographers took. And red is what people did before our studies. And you can see it's pretty good. It gets like the slope of the line, right? But it's definitely not perfect. So with our parameterization based on our Wellesley data, it's now blue. The model can do such a good job. You might even not be able to tell, depending how far you sit, the difference between the blue and the green points. And so basically, it's a beautiful example of taking Wellesley to the world, taking data that our students collected while they were in college, and it's now been put into global models, just one at the moment, but hopefully will be a bunch more global models that can be then used to get better predictions of CO2. Thank you.
Becky, go ahead.
All right, well, hello everyone, thanks for being here. So I have the privilege in my work at Wellesley to develop next generation solar energy materials, and I think more importantly, develop the next generation of solar energy scientists. And so the way that we do that is we are making new materials called perovskite semiconductors for use in emerging solar cells. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm a material scientist. And so what that means is that I'm really a person who studies relationships. Relationships between what something is made out of, its atomic structure, its chemistry, how that relates to its emergent properties. So is it clear? Is it green, right? How does that come from that underlying chemistry and structure? And how can we influence those properties and that chemistry through processing, or how do we actually make something? And it's an engineering discipline, so at the core to all of that is trying to solve some problem. And the problem that I'm particularly interested in solving is how do we have abundant renewable energy on our planet? So the problem we're trying to tackle is that we need better solar cells. And when we say better, we mean better, at least I mean better in sort of 3 very specific ways. So they need to be high performing. They have to do the function of a solar cell, take solar energy, convert it into electrical energy incredibly well. So we want things that can do that better. We need them to be able to be made quickly at minimal cost, right? Another way we can think about this is we don't want materials, we want solutions now, and we don't want to spend a lot of energy, like physicals, like actual energy to make them, right? We want them to be able to be produced readily. And we need them to last a long time. So while the sort of core pieces of this technology may be similar to what's in your phone or in your computer, right, these need to behave as infrastructure despite the fact that they're made as sort of in the same way that we might think of as sort of other more disposable electronics. And our solution to these three sort of key points is perovskite tandem solar cells. And so perovskite refers to a class of solution processable semiconductors. So effectively, we can make semiconductor inks and deposit them and turn them into solids. So this gives us all of the benefits of sort of cheap manufacturing that come from sort of our knowledge of ink-based printing. And they're tandem, meaning that we use multiple materials and stack them on top of one another. And what that allows us to do is make a substantial increase in the absolute efficiency of these devices. And so while a single absorber, any solar cell you've probably ever seen, is made out of one absorbing material, the best that could ever do is 30% efficiency. So taking that solar resource and converting into electricity. And by adding a second absorber, we can raise that from 30% to 40%, which means not only do we have much better sort of yield out of our energy installations, but we need less material, less land, less infrastructure in order to make the sort of energy demand we need to meet happen. And so how do we do that in my lab? Well, we do a bunch of different things. The first thing we do is we always make a semiconductor. So our first step in any process is to make something. And so we are making semiconductors here at Wellesley, so we do the solution processing. We're really interested in that study of relationships, so our next step is we monitor. So we try to understand in the sort of synthesis process, how are we going from a solution to a solid, and how can we control and direct and optimize that process? Once we've actually made a material, we want to go ahead and measure it. So we want to understand the ways in which, is it a good semiconductor? Does it perform the way that we expect? Is it going to be a good material in the field? And then ultimately, we want to model and predict, right, if we're going to go ahead and turn this into a solar cell, right, what is going to be the long-term performance and stability? So how can we begin to hit that sort of third metric of having long-term stability? And so we do a whole bunch of different tasks, working with a bunch of different collaborators and partners, but I think the key to all of it is that we're trying to understand these relationships of chemistry, processing, and performance such that we can make semiconductors that are different and better than what's been made before, and ultimately make solar cells that are better than anything that's been made before.
Thank you for sharing. Yes. You know, this is very exciting for me to hear because as Courtney mentioned, I work a lot with companies and foundations and NGOs on this issue, and for me, a lot of it is about the energy transition, and really for the world, a lot of it is about understanding the science and how that informs both what's possible, how policymakers can engage, and a lot of it is also about resilience, and how do we understand the world will change, and how can we just improve that resilience overall? So it's very exciting to see a lot of that basis here happening at Wellesley. Wellesley cares a lot about taking our work to the world and just really having an impact. And you've all shared little aspects of that, but can you just share a little bit more about how you're driving that impact in the world with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I'll hop in first and then I'll hand it over. So I think there are lots of ways that we participate in sort of a global scientific conversation for this work. So a very specific one is that, you know, this work is done in collaboration with fantastic partners around the world. I have several students here, some of who had the opportunity to go to Helmholtz, Berlin last summer to work with collaborators there and sort of seeing, right, in a different setting with different resources, right, what does this research look like? But I think for me, one of the biggest ways that my work has impact is in sort of what my students do next, right, when they leave Wellesley. So a really exciting thing for me about this technology is that there are startups right now that are trying to commercialize perovskite solar cells, right? That is a thing that is happening around the world. It's happening in Massachusetts. And I have students who go and work for those companies. And so for me, I think it's, you know, it is a matter of time before I get to buy a solar cell that my students directly had a hand in making, and that is just an incredibly exciting, like, tangible impact for me to imagine.
Get an autograph.
Exactly, I want that, yeah.
Alden.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think as scientists are generally not that great historically about actually getting out there. We publish in journals that most people don't know exist, right? And we go talk to other scientists at conferences and meetings and workshops and things, and that is important, right? And bringing students to conferences is it's been a wonderful way to get them engaged in this broader process, right? But it can be challenging to sort of figure out how to reach beyond that. And just one thing that I'll maybe highlight that's been really rewarding in this project is I've been having to work with in different locations all across New England, and it's often on private land or town land, and so we have to get permission from land managers to be able to do research there. And so we have all of these contacts with land managers and local governments, and it's been really gratifying and great to actually bring the research back to them. They want to know, what are we doing? And being able to engage with local communities sort of more at a small scale, and realize that people are coming and hiking in the trails, and we're crouched on our hands and knees measuring plants and measuring soil moisture and collecting soil samples, et cetera. And being able to sort of highlight at that local level, like, what is this land being used for? And it's for conservation, it's for recreation, but it's also for research, and being able to showcase that. So that's sort of one element that sort of came to mind, the sort of the local engagement, which I really valued.
That's great. Rachel, please share your experience.
And to add to that, I would say, again, sort of like Alden, I think my primary impact is getting my science out to the scientific community. And then through the scientific community, for example, in the study I just showed, it enters these global models that will then be used by modelers all over the world that then will directly, hopefully, impact, if people listen to them, will impact policy on climate change. So that's one big method. Another way, though, also is I like to think of training not only my students, but also just even younger than Wellesley students. So I'm teaching at the moment, for example, a class on communicating chemistry. And as part of this class, my students go to the Natick, it's a nearby town, public schools, and teach the kids 3 science lessons each, and get them excited about chemistry and science. And so it's maybe our local world, but those students are going to grow up, and those students, tell their parents what they believe. And I think it's a way of just spreading science and the importance of science and understanding science to a broader audience.
It's interesting because I see a lot of young people really excited to get involved in climate change, and see it in my work all the time. Everyone wants to be working on a project that is helping tackle this challenge and other challenges as well, right? But climate change is really top of mind for folks. How are students contributing to your work, and how do you see them engage in your classes, and how is that preparing them to have impact in the future?
I can take this one first. Sure. So I would say the students are doing everything. I mean, like, my students went to Miami, they collected the data. The data was 2 students' theses. So, it's a big project, so it takes time, but really it just would not have happened without the Wellesley students. They did absolutely everything. And not just on that project. On another project, my students are building this new method to measure noble gases. Again, it takes a while, but it wouldn't happen without them. So that's the biggest way. The other thing is also I teach, another class I teach here at Wellesley is an introductory environmental chemistry class for students, mostly non-majors who are just interested in climate change, and some of them want to go forth and do other things in the future, and some of them might be more interested in climate change. So I think that's another way students can get involved. If they don't want to necessarily do research and get involved full-time, they can also learn about some of the issues.
Share more?
Yeah, I think like Rachel, right? I think you saw in the pictures that I presented, right? Those aren't staged. That's what our science looks like, right? Like, the students are really the core drivers of the work that we're doing, and everything from making a semiconductor to running a 40-hour experiment at one of these national laboratories, it doesn't happen without them. And I think, to me, the thing I really want to communicate through that process, and I try to bring this into my classes also, is that their time and attention is important. And it's important in several big ways, right? It's important because the science that they're doing, right, is science that truly does not happen without them, right? Like, no one else is going to make these materials, is doing these measurements, right? We are going to advance knowledge together that has innate importance. It's important to a scientific community. We get to collaborate, right? We go to, one of the pictures I shared is students working at a synchrotron in Lund, Sweden, right? They're working with an international group that brought together scientists from 5 different countries to be on this experiment, right? That has real meaning. And I think it matters in that we're working on things that the world truly needs solutions for. And so, even if they don't continue to be solar energy folks or continue to work in energy, I hope that they take with them, right, their time and attention has an inherent value, and where they turn it is going to make a difference, right, to their community, and sort of in rippling effects out from there.
Yeah, I may approach this less from the research side, but sort of thinking about the interdisciplinarity that the environmental studies program in particular is really trying to cultivate. And so thinking a little bit more from a curricular side of things, and building capacity in students going out in the world, and thinking about the range of things that students, especially graduating from environmental studies, go on to do, like consulting work, filmmakers, research, like lawyers, like all sorts of different impacts and ways that they're engaging. And I think one thing that's really important that we focus on, so for example, we have one of our core introductory courses in the environmental studies major is focused on climate change. And we want our students to have a really good understanding of climate change. But it's really like, we sort of think about, or the faculty, we think about this course not necessarily about climate change. It's really a course about how do you address and diagnose and understand and approach really complex, complicated problems, right? And so we use climate change as the big example of that and really dig into it, right? But I combined with research and the courses that students are taking, I really think we're trying to build this capacity to be able to sit in a space that's interdisciplinary, that's complicated, right? And to, I just see a lot of how climate change is discussed, out on the internet in the world, and it often gets boiled down to like little bite-sized, nicely digestible pieces, right? Whether you're sort of wherever you sort of stand with respect to climate change. But I think our students are building that capacity to know that that's not, it's a really complex, social, physical system, right? And really trying to think about giving them the tools that allow them to go off and then really sort of apply it in the context that they're really engaging in.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is one of those problems that requires everything, right? It's not only the science, it requires economics, finance, policy and the law, and so much more. And it requires people across all walks of life and all geographies. And of course, there are many problems like that. But I think this is the value of the liberal arts education here, that it's really about bringing those capacities and that critical thinking to different issues. Okay, so you saw how the audience is feeling about climate change. Summarized, scared, not very hopeful. I am sure that you see things through your work that gives you hope about the progress that we're making. So I want to make sure that we share some of those. Maybe, Becky, you can get us started with, what are you seeing out there that you're super excited about for the next 10 years?
Yeah, there's a lot more renewable energy on the grid today than there was, right? A lot more, right? So the amount of, I think something like the amount of solar that we installed in 2025 is equivalent to all of the solar we installed up until 2020 ever, right? Like that's a big uptick in sort of in the amount of energy that we're putting out into the grid. And I think if there's a thing that sort of I'm enthusiastic about, it's just that we can solve a lot of problems if we have energy. Like we can sequester carbon, we can store energy inefficiently, like we can make hydrogen, we can do all sorts of things if we have access to abundant, readily available, low carbon energy. And so for me, thinking about the way that manifests from, cooperative solar agreements and communities, right, up to, right, industry, national lab partnerships to make, like Commonwealth Fusion Systems have an operational fusion plant, right? All of those levels, I think are real areas of opportunity, and yeah, that make me excited.
What about you, Rachel?
I think what makes me most hopeful is just our young people. The fact that the younger generation cares so much about climate, so much more than the older. And as you said, lots of people want to get involved. And with just so many bright minds working on it and so much passion, I think things will move in the right direction.
Yeah, this is a difficult question because it's easy to dwell on some things, right, and to have some legitimate concerns. But I really look at some of the momentum that's different from, say, 10 years ago. And just thinking about, like, recently, renewable energy sources surpassed coal in global electricity production, right? Like, we're really making some significant headway, looking at market forces and thinking about the price of renewable energy is often cheaper or as cheap, right, and as sort of cost-effective as fossil fuels, et cetera. So there's real big momentum changes that are happening that people were sort of talking about, like, oh, at some point the price of solar will come down, and it's down. It's now, equivalent. So those are really hopeful signs, and sort of thinking about I guess there's also a really big active discussion about the energy transition in a way that even 10 years ago, it was more like thinking about the future, and now it is really thinking about now, and that is exciting.
Yeah, I see a lot of progress, not only in the energy transition, but also in food systems and in finance and in really all of the capital that is going into developing all of these solutions and scaling them. I'm going to come back to the audience, and I promised I would come to you for questions. So, okay, there are microphones close by, so if you can get here.
So I wanted to ask a question just tying on what you guys do in science and what you're talking about, the economics and the finance, is, given the current administration's way they handle climate change, I wanted to know what was the impact of funding sources for you, and how do you go about to, I guess, supplement what was taken out?
I'll start. So, I mean, I think the broad landscape, it's significant, obviously, right? Personally, some of what I do can actually be relatively inexpensive, but what is unfortunate in terms of, like, I can carry on a bunch of my research without lots of funding. However, the funding has been so great to be able to support people and support students and have students who graduate then return and be research fellows in your labs. Like, that's really meaningful, right? And it's so, like, there's the equipment support and things like that, right? But there's also the people support and the training and the ability to have funding to bring students to places and things. And so that is where, at least personally, is most frustrating, at least immediately.
Yeah, I would say it's been hard. I also have been a little bit lucky. One of the main projects I have has not been cut. We didn't know, like every week it's like, are we still gonna have funding? But we just got funding for the next 2 years. And that's the one that studies the coastal ocean, which is great because we've been doing it every year since 2018, so it would be a real loss if it was stopped. But it has really impacted my field. It's now, I'm on some national committees, and we spend a lot of time talking about the lack of funding, how we can try to move to some philanthropy to try to support, not us personally, but like the wider scientific community, especially young scientists who are sort of starting out, just getting into their postdocs, getting into their first positions, and now are at a landscape where there's half or less funding than they used to be. I think it's really going to set the field back unless enough other people, private foundations, can step in or the government changes.
Yeah, I think it's probably no surprise. It's not been a great time to be a solar researcher, and I think there are ways in which the sort of basic science that we do overlaps with other. We use similar materials for X-ray detectors, for doing photodetectors, right? We can continue to do sort of our core science and sort of market it perhaps in different ways. But I think to me one of the big losses is sort of this. What is going to happen in this sort of academic space, particularly in the U.S., right? So I do think that, like, these technologies, the technologies I work on, like, they're going to happen, right? I think, like, at the sort of industrial scale, work is happening, right? People want energy. There's growing electricity demand. And right, solar is one of the like most manufacturable products that we can actually have to meet that energy demand. So I think it's going to happen. I think the loss is going to be, right, what is our workforce at sort of this, as science leaders in contributing to that, right? So, right, other places it's still happening, right? And I see that, as we have these sort of big international partnerships, and I think the loss is how are we going to contribute, and where, are we going to fall behind really in being. Like, I think these things are going to happen, but it's like, what is our participation going to be?
Yeah, look, it's a really important question, and I will take the liberty of addressing it at 3 levels. One, in terms of the Wellesley experience, I hope you can see we'll continue to invest in excellence and in our professors and in the research that can happen here. This is about providing the experience that we want for students who will go on and continue to make impact. Of course, we will always need help, so we need to continue to get those resources. Second, we have the Wagner Centers, and those are really supporting our professors and researchers to get their research out into the world. So we continue to protect what they're doing at a time when things are quite challenging. And just finally, if I step back from Wellesley and just think about the broader ecosystem, I think there's recognition from companies and financial institutions, from philanthropy and foundations as well, that this is a time to step up. And so I actually see a lot of activity to think through what is the blended finance, or what are the different mechanisms that we can be using to, one, fund the science, two, drive the innovation that is needed and really commercialize the solutions that we need. Not easy, and I think it's going to be tough, but it's something that even I'm seeing some positive notes on. Other questions? Please.
My question is actually about you as professors and researchers. So a little bit stepping back from the climate change topic, I'm curious if you could comment on pursuing your research at Wellesley, at a liberal arts college, versus at a large research university. We certainly benefit from having your expertise, but how do you benefit from doing your research at a liberal arts college?
I can go first. Sorry. I just love it. So I actually was at a large research institution for several years and then made the decision to come to Wellesley because at my institution, I loved doing research and I learned a lot and I was contributing, but I really missed interacting with students. I had some grad students, but it wasn't the same sort of daily contact with students in my classes and my research. And I've just found it fabulous here. I do less research. I'm spending maybe 50% of my time research, which is still pretty good compared to 100% of my time where I used to be. But I think it's still the same quality, it's just a slightly slower pace. And the students bring such a great perspective. They have wonderful questions. They do actually wonderful work, as I said, and their enthusiasm. So all those three things just keep me so motivated and can enable, sort of top science to happen. Not, I would say, even at the liberal arts, but like really surrounded by this environment.
Yeah, I would share that, I think being at Wellesley is allowing me to have the impact that I really want to have, which is, I think we are doing real science that is meaningful, right? That, important folks care about. But I think more than that, right? I think about being a researcher as being part of someone's sort of scientific process, right? Like, what is the sort of, where are you in from first basic science discovery to we have some maybe product in the world, or we understand something at a more foundational level. And yeah, I've always known that the impact I want to have is I'm part of someone else's sort of what scientists do they want to be. And we're here talking about the climate crisis, just to return to that a little bit, right? That's going to be a multi-generational journey. And so if I can do great science, that's fantastic. I think for me, it's even more important that I get to be part of, this helping other folks figure out what their science trajectories are going to be that are going to go well beyond what I do here.
Yeah, I really love that doing research with students and having research students in my lab really does sort of combine the research and the teaching component. I'm just thinking back when I was in graduate school at a really large research university, which is a great experience in graduate school, but there was sort of like research and then teaching. And the professors really sort of lived in two different worlds. And it's really fun to actually live in both worlds at the same time. And be able to, in one of my courses right now, I was showing some of the work that we're doing because it's relevant to what we were talking about, and a bunch of the students in the class had done that work. They were in my lab, and so it's really interesting it's just great to be able to sort of see that play out, not sort of separate from the teaching. It's part of the whole experience, which is really gratifying.
I loved my time at Wellesley and with my science professor, so this is bringing memories back. Is there any other questions? One, yes?
You bring me hope when you talk about momentum. I just wondered, in your opinion, collectively, can the current administration derail the progress that you think you see?
I'll give you a bit more time. The question was, there's hope with all the momentum that we're seeing, and is there a risk that the current administration derails or stops that? So go ahead.
I mean, I think they can derail a lot of federal things. But I think it's important to highlight that what's happening at the federal level, and regardless of administration, is not the whole picture, right? So states and local governments, states in particular, I think can play a huge, huge role, right? And not just because collectively it is all of our greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, but like states like California have a huge influence on setting policy nationally, right? And so when they set standards for cars, that applies regardless of federal law, because car makers don't want to make two different types of cars. They make them to comply with California. So that's sort of a long-standing example of states leading the way. But it really does give me hope, right, that there's other leaders, right, that's not at the federal level.
I guess I would say in terms of science research to try to understand the processes related to climate change, I'm afraid the answer is yes. I mean, there are other countries and they're doing a great job, but the US was a huge player. And if you sort of really decrease, I mean, a factor of 2 is enormous. If you really decrease one of those players, I'm afraid it will have an impact.
Yeah, I guess my sort of, the perspective I was going to take is the sort of zooming out, right? So I think, right, we've thought, we're sort of making these advances in solar energy technologies, right? We've been making these advances in sort of the energy transition. And I think, the sort of likelihood is that the piece of that that's contributed by the US is going to be less, right? And that's not that won't happen, right? I think we will have an energy transition. I think it's sort of what is the role that we as a country will play in it, right? Versus, right, that is happening and continuing to happen in other places. And so, I think we're losing the opportunity of how do we participate in that piece of it.
Maybe I'll take this as an opportunity to think about the future. And if we think about, like, really the context that we're in and the celebration that we're here for today, so Wellesley's 150th year, what message do you want to leave the audience with? What's coming for the future?
Yeah, well, I was actually, in Provost Coile's opening remarks, she mentioned sort of the capacity to learn. And I was in a conversation with my research group, some of whom are here, thank you for being here, and one of my alumni who's currently at the University of Toronto yesterday. And one of the things she said in talking to the students about how transitioning to grad school is tough, but you know what, you're gonna do great, because what Wellesley's done for you is it's taught you how to learn. Right? And like other students will come and they will have more preparation and have taken, 8 chemistry classes to your 2 in some discipline, but you have the capacity to learn. And so when I think about the future and sort of uncertainty and having to solve problems that we have no idea what they are, never mind what the solutions to those problems are going to be, I think if we continue to instill in our students that they have the capacity to learn new things and that they have the confidence to do that, I think we're going to be all right.
I think Becky beautifully said that, so I echo everything you said. And maybe add, as well as capacity and confidence, I think the communication skills are really important. I think Wellesley does a really good job at teaching their students how to get out into the world, how to communicate, share their knowledges, and share their passions. And I think that can continue for another 150 years.
Yeah, I think I wanted to convey sort of a message of like, well, we focus on what's happening around us a lot, and looking forward, I think I've been trying to find ways to keep myself grounded and sort of in touch with the world around me in a physical sense, not necessarily in a sort of news or science or broader sense, but to find some way to sort of maintain your inner resilience. And the campus, right, provides that tremendously. And so just a plug for people to, go out and just disconnect for a little bit and just sort of like see the world around you. And for me recently, birding has been a big thing. Really encourage you all to go look at some birds and and just get grounded a little bit, right? And have those moments. There's too many ways to get distracted, and I feel like that's only going to increase. So finding ways to not be distracted and actually be grounded and centered. And this campus really could do that.
Yeah, this is the perfect place to recharge and recenter. And you are all examples of the wonderful, passionate, and impactful professors that we have at Wellesley. Thank you for today. Thank you for educating our students, and enjoy.